So hey y'all, I'm back with another video. So tonight's video is yet again another Chioma Chats video podcast edition. So by the title, we're going to be talking about the erasure of dark-skinned women in film. I wanted to discuss this because I came across a very interesting thread on Instagram about how there is this trope in film that is adding to the erasure of darker-skinned female representation and almost alluding to the fact that darker-skinned women only exist in the older generation when we speak about family structure. So in 7th or 8th grade biology class, we had a unit on genetics, and I remember learning about the Punnett square, which is a diagram method to essentially see the probability of the gene combinations for an offspring when you combine the gametes of two parents. Although genetics really act like a lottery and sometimes your genes truly are a roll of the dice, there is a pattern that if there is a presence of a dominant gene or a presence of the same gene from both parents, that gene is more likely to appear. Now, this refers to real life. However, in the film industry, casting for characters that are playing a family doesn't always follow the Punnett square, let alone the assumed logistics of genetics. We sometimes see actors playing roles that in the real world doesn't seem as realistic or practical when portrayed in film, and oftentimes this has to do with skin color. In this instance, the movie You People that recently aired on Netflix is a prime example of unrealistic portrayal of family offspring in Black film. The movie was heavily talked about, being that the lead actress Lauren London made her return to acting after the tragic loss of her boyfriend Nipsey Hussle. One thing that was instantly a bit off to me was how her parents in the film were both dark-skinned, her dad played by Eddie Murphy and her mom played by Nia Long, and she is obviously a biracial woman who in most cases wouldn't be produced by two monoracial parents. Now the film does explain that Nia Long's character Fatima is actually biracial herself and she has a white father, or maybe it was a white grandfather. And yes, genetics could most definitely make all of these combinations in the real world, but the likelihood of this is pretty low, and more importantly, the frequent portrayal in film of two dark-skinned parents producing a biracial or ambiguous-looking daughter is causing society to view this blatant erasure of darker-skinned women. There are so many examples of this throughout film, not just in the movie You People. So I wanted to shout out and give credit to Mayowa's World. She is a fellow YouTuber, and she talks about topics related to Blackness and how it appears in many different constructs of society. She made a really eye-opening post about how this ideology shows up in film, and I think it's so true. Like, I've always seen it, but never really looked that far into it until her post about this. So I wanted to unpack what she wrote and talk a little bit more about how the film industry has been purposely erasing the dark-skinned female representation in family structure over the years. So I've broken this video down into one overall main talking point. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. So my one and overall main talking point is literally the erasure of dark-skinned women in film, especially through the idea of family structure. I don't think I noticed this as much when I was younger, but now that I look back, there was shows and films that definitely took the time to cast a Black dad, a Black mom, and even a Black son, but either a biracial daughter or a daughter of some level of racial ambiguity. And I also think it's nuances like this that affected many of us young Black girls growing up, because we would be watching shows and sometimes not really be able to see ourselves in certain characters. I will credit that there were several shows where this wasn't the case, such as True Jackson VP, played by Keke Palmer, or Ant Farm, played by China Ann McClain. But I think at some point there was a shift. I was reading this article the other day, and it was talking about how Black teenage tweens and teens don't really have an it girl to look up to like we did 10 years ago. I feel like the 12-year-old girls of today are without a population of other Black starlets that are around their age range. Like, I do think they have social media stars, but the actresses and talent-based celebrities are definitely lacking for the Black tween group. And part of it is that when Black women and girls are seeing themselves on screen, there is a lot of erasure that's been happening in tidbits over the years. So let's get into Mayowa's thread about this and how this has been happening. So the tweet starts off by asking, what's a trope in TV shows or movies that makes you irrationally upset? And Mayowa said, elders being dark-skinned and young people being light-skinned. So let's continue. The next slide says, I think most of the people who study the American landscape will say that some sort of mixed race look will be in the next 30 to 40 years. This was said by Kenya Barris, who is an American film and television writer, producer, director, and actor. He produced the show Blackish and all of the spinoffs that came with that, and he also was a part of the film You People, which is the film in question. So it says, in the film You People, directed by Kenya Barris, Eddie Murphy and Nia Long are the parents of Lauren London, a biracial woman. Next, when talking about the examples in Hollywood movies and sitcoms, it says a Hollywood Hollywood trope that I am tired of seeing is when there are dark-skinned elders like parents, grandparents, and then light-skinned young folks. It sends a message that dark-skinned people are something of the past and that multiracial or light-skinned people are something of the future. Black men and boys are allowed to be dark in media, while black women and girls face erasure. For example, in the show Casey Undercover that aired on Disney Channel, Zendaya plays the daughter of a black man and a light-skinned black woman, but her siblings are a dark-skinned brother and a darker-skinned little sister. Now, I will say Zendaya did advocate for black representation, but I feel like it's a little bit of a double-edged sword when you're trying to advocate for something that doesn't necessarily apply to you, but you're still taking the benefits of the role that you have. I feel like they try to make it make sense, but in reality, this probably really wouldn't happen. Moving forward, the next slide says, Hollywood had us out here thinking that light-skinned gene is only passed down to women and family dynamics, which is false and created under the colorist structure of prioritizing light-skinned and racially ambiguous women. I have never seen a movie with racially ambiguous / light-skinned parents creating all dark-skinned daughters. In the show Greenleaf, there are two monoracial black parents creating a biracial daughter yet again. Now, to me, this is interesting because if we're being real, in the real world, a man like Keith David and a woman like Lynn Whitfield would definitely not create a Merle Dandridge. But of course, Lamont Rucker's character makes more sense because, again, according to Hollywood, somehow darker-skinned genes can only be passed down to men. And this has been such a big part of black family representation in film because even in a show like The Cosby Show, the Huxtables only had a dark-skinned son. Of course, they had a dark-skinned daughter through Rudy and Vanessa, but with Denise, who was played by Lisa Bonet, it just doesn't make sense. I feel like in Hollywood, they try to play on this idea of having kids represent a multitude of different outcomes, but in real life, it's not like that the majority of the time. Like, yes, it can happen, but it's not often that your sister looks biracial, but all of the other siblings look like a monoracial black person. I know me and all of my siblings definitely look black. I did read somewhere that in the show Greenleaf, the daughter is an outside kid that the mother had with a white man, but let's be real, if that's just supposed to be implied, that sounds like more of an excuse because if the show is about this church family that has all of this scandal and drama, just cast a black girl to represent what we're actually viewing and not what we're implying. So the next slide says, colorism is inflamed by misogyny and favors light-skinned women because under white supremacy, light skin is considered feminine. So using the example of My Wife and Kids, of course, Claire was originally played by a dark-skinned girl, but we remember Claire as the light-skinned Claire played by Jennifer Freeman. Even Katie was played by Parker McKenna Posey, and both women are biracial in real life when in the show, their dad is a black man and their mom is a light-skinned black woman, and their brother is a dark-skinned black man. And I think colorism obviously played a role as to why the original Claire was substituted for the Claire that we know, and it does directly correlate to the fact that that feminine look is usually carried out by light-skinned or biracial women in film. And this is so crazy to me because growing up, it did confuse me a little bit, but I didn't really understand why this representation was what it was. But it's because the erasure has always been heavy in film and in entertainment. So the slide continues into the next one and says, and more erasure from books to movies. The two dark-skinned parents create, you guessed it, another biracial daughter. So this one is referencing the book, The Sun is Also a Star. So it says, why does it seem taboo to have a dark-skinned mother and a dark-skinned daughter in the movie? It feels like there's always a balancing act that has to be done with blackness, especially with black women. And I think this is facts. I mean, come on. How does it make sense in real life that two dark-skinned parents that have very Afrocentric features would have a daughter that looks like Yara Shahidi? So the next slide says, I don't need a lesson in genetics. Yes, I understand that it is possible for dark-skinned people to have a light-skinned child, but please, be for real. It's not the common. I ask you to move away from rare exceptions and look at the structural issues. This is bigger than your exceptional chances. This is a systemic issue that prioritizes light-skinned and racially ambiguous people at the expense of dark-skinned marginalized black people. Black men are able to maintain being dark-skinned and represented in media, while the spectrum for dark-skinned women becomes more and more skewed. She also continues in the next slide and says, when it comes to slavery movies about colonialism or historical movies, dark-skinned people are always in abundance, and often these movies have the most violence to dark-skinned people. This exasperates colorism because it normalizes us to seeing dark-skinned people being brutalized and in servitude. If you can find us for movies about slavery, you can find us for movies about joy too. And I think this is actually very important to point out because it's not like darker-skinned women can't be casted for these roles, but they were given roles that subject them to things that are deemed negative, such as slavery, such as abuse, such as hardship, things that we don't have to be reminded reminded of because we're still living in struggle. But those same actors aren't given the roles as the leading lady or the love interest. But Hollywood is quick to show them in labor or conflict or combat. And don't for one second think that all of this is just coincidental, because it's not. I think we become so conditioned and it's so normal that nobody ever challenges it, but the issue is right in front of our face. So the next slide says, and if dark-skinned people are only of the past, what does that say for the future? I mean, to me, there is a biracial infiltration in a lot of spaces that are meant for Black people. And I don't necessarily think that biracial people should be shunned from every Black space, but I think accurate representation is important. You can't use somebody who wouldn't represent you in real life to represent you in film. I hate when people try to just say that, oh, it's just a movie or it's just a TV show, this isn't real. But at the end of the day, film and writing and entertainment is supposed to be exemplary of what happens in the real world, or at the very least, someone's pigment of imagination for a fiction story. But if we're doing it through the lens of human beings and not cartoons or superheroes, what is so hard to showcase Black women in film without whitewashing the lineage of Black families? I think all of this is kind of strategic, because either society wants to lean more towards this multiracial look in the near future, or some of the higher ups in Black film and entertainment have colorist preferences and they showcase it through our TVs. So I think Mayowa's World did a beautiful job about explaining her point. The Instagram caption that she posted also said, "Happy Black History Month. I made these slides after feeling frustrated by the erasure in more and more movies, and Kenya Barris's response to colorism was the last straw that broke the camel's back." I don't like how discussions of colorism and erasure is met with humor, like it's some kind of annoying fly that bothers you every so often. We need to get serious about how we talk about colorism and the effects it has from the macro to the micro. The amount of power and backing he has while simultaneously being unaware of colorism is concerning and negligent. Here's a list I compiled of erasure, but the list is endless. Write in the comments which movies I missed. So I was just going through the comments. There were a lot of people in support with what she was saying, including myself, because I think Hollywood is trying to push this idea that being a dark-skinned woman is something of the past, like it's this ancient, long-lost occurrence, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, dark-skinned women exist everywhere. There was somebody who said that this large ideology is largely accepted by white folks because to them, it erases the racism that they created. Pushing light-skinned people is the way of non-being accountable for their racism, colonialism, etc. It makes their cause, oppression and white supremacy, more relevant than ever. They really made the world even more white. So somebody else said, what is especially saddening about this topic is that from my own experiences and observations, both children and adults will encourage dark-skinned children to make sure to not have kids as dark as we are. People literally have anxieties and paranoia about children coming out being dark and instill that onto us. They literally introduce reproduction very early to kids, all to socially engineer a world where we don't exist. It's vile. And I think this one is also very true because in a lot of Black cultures, but especially those of us who are African or Caribbean, there's a lot of colorism that takes place. And because family lineage means a lot to a lot of African tribes and cultures, there are those older people who encourage you to find a fair-skinned partner so that your children don't spread or continue the dark-skinned traits. And I feel like what we're seeing in film actually is representing this very concerning mindset and practice that darker-skinned children, and especially the girls, have to be eradicated from society. One last person said, "Thanks for this great slideshow. When watching Blackish, there was an episode on colorism, and I felt like the ending was more sympathetic to light-skinned/mixed race people and portrayed darker-skinned people like bullies. It really bothers me since light-skinned Black people really have much more privilege due to colorism. This helps paint a picture of how the media perpetrates this down to the casting level as well, not just scripts." And I think this one is a great comment as well because, again, the entertainment industry is reflecting something in society that people want to act like isn't that big of a thing when it really is. It's not just the scripts and the storylines, but the actual casting of these actors who are showing us that there truly is an agenda. I think with the movie You People, after watching it, to me it seems more like a parody on what is actually happening in society, especially American society. The movie did have some funny moments, and I don't think it was as bad as people tried to make it seem. But if we're being real, if it was supposed to be some type of representation of a cultural clash and deciphering through societal expectations and generational differences, I just feel like it missed really showcasing this through a more accurate physical representation. And I think that Hollywood entertainment has been doing this for a while. I think there's also been some good leading Black female actors in a lot of shows, but we do have to also consider the type of role that they're playing. Do they get to be outgoing and funny and attractive and desired, or are their character traits more exemplary of stereotypes or aggressive behavior or things that we're just tired of seeing in Black female actors? I do think there is a biracial agenda, like I said, and I think a lot of what film is doing is representing representing this because a lot of society is actually acting on it. And it's not necessarily wrong to have a film or show that discusses the sometimes uncomfortable encounters between two different types of people. But if there is a frequent and reoccurring practice that doesn't always showcase accurate representations of Black families, I think it's fair to wake it up that Hollywood is purposely doing this to Black women. I think the best solution is to speak on it, as well as have more discourse about how this is affecting Black women, as well as push the shows and movies that have good representations of Black women in film. I'm not against all of the slavery movies or all of the movies where a Black woman may be struggling, because sometimes they are good films with interesting plots and so forth, but I'm not gonna lie, it is kind of tired. Remember when Zoe Saldana was casted to play Nina Simone and faced a lot of backlash because it didn't make sense for a biracial woman to be playing in the biopic for an iconic Black woman. So let's be real, Hollywood knows what they're doing and they do try to play in our faces, and we can't really allow them to intentionally or unintentionally add to the erasure of Black women in film. I remember I took a women in film class my last semester of college, and it was probably the best class I had in college. And we talked about the male gaze, we talked about colorism, we talked about femme fatale, and it made me open my eyes to how women get portrayed in film, especially Black women. I did a whole breakdown on the movie ATL and how colorism and preference played into some of the stereotypes that were present in the film. I'll link that down below if y'all want to check it out. But all in all, I think that we should require better showmanship of Black families and Black women in particular, and be realer about how we want to be represented and presented in the entertainment industry. So that is it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know your commentary on my commentary down below. What do you think? What do you know? Let me know. If you haven't already, go stream my song Ballin'. It is out on all platforms, link down below, and new music coming soon. And lastly, don't forget to follow me on all of my social media networks, and I will see y'all in my next video. Bye, y'all.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah. 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 I said 34 B cup, 30 in a deep cut, 20 bad bitches QTM. Yeah, we up. 16 tops and bottles, man. I went and got my teeth done. 10 minutes with him, now his 15 minutes is cut. Never ever make a nigga think that he up, cause you a queen and I'm a queen. Now shout out to Latifah. Security in the back with a racket like Serena. Ex nigga crying, laugh at him like a hyena. Like damn, what you saying, daddy? Yeah, I know I got a fatty pussy. Talking to him, talk my shit. Yeah, I be getting catty. Play with me, I bet you won't. Fatty on his chest and now he calling me a stethoscope. Pink fit, look, think I'm looking good, incredible. Cutting niggas off, I'm coming through like a semi-colon mansion in the motherland. December come, that's where we going. Body hot, my niggas frozen. Niggas put my picture up and yeah, they go and get the lotion. And I'm the one they check up on. Feeling so lucky, getting green like a leprechaun. Run a few errands with the bag with the checkers on it. Push it on the floor because it's mine and I'm stepping on it. Get the cheese and keep it wet, so yeah, he call me macaroni. Niggas on my line and now they begging me for matrimony. Detroit nigga touchdown and we to the Coney. Had it up, big body nigga and he grabbing on me. Cheers to my success, now every day is a